Good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome you on a debate organized by the Association for International Affairs, the Brussels Binder, and Women on Air. My name is Eva Oliva. I work at the Association for International Affairs as a project coordinator, and I will be walking you through today's debate. Today, we will focus on the topic of women in the media, in public space, their representation in the public debate, as well as diversity in the media and discussions as such. We decided to dedicate this upcoming hour to this topic because we, meaning as three organizers, share a common interest in making public discussions and media space gender equal. That is why we created open databases where you may find female experts for your interviews, articles, and debates to strengthen the representation of female experts. We strongly believe we all can benefit from including more women in public discussions and in the creation of media content. Until now, we may have witnessed that oftentimes public debates, interviews, and also respondents in the news and on the radio are represented more strongly by men. However, the amount of educated and well-experienced women experts in their field is countless. So naturally, questions arise. How is it that public and media space is lacking women? Where does this underrepresentation come from? How much did we actually progress in solving this issue? What is the situation and the perception of this topic in Czech society? How do we compare to other countries, or as some of our audience may be also interested in foreign policy, how specific is this area of expertise in the question of finding more women to share their knowledge and opinions? I will be asking these questions to my three guests who agreed to take part in the discussion and whom I am very happy to welcome. So to give it a quick round of introductions, I would like to welcome Noelle O'Reilly, who is the director and spokesperson of Women on Air. She is also a former producer and reporter at the Irish radio station RTE. She also studied women's history, so her approach will be very much appreciated. Welcome, Noelle.
Thank you.
We also have with us Wojciech Boháč, editor-in-chief and reporter at Voxpot. Wojciech is, I would say, a very well-experienced journalist, also in regards to the field work. He focuses mainly on conflict-related topics and the regions of Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the Middle East. Hello to you.
Hello, thank you very much.
And to complete this trio, I also welcome Timea Krofony. She is a lawyer, gender expert, and researcher at the Center for Gender and Science at the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences. Warm welcome to you, Timea.
Thank you very much, Eva, and hello, everyone.
All right, before we dive right into it, I would like to encourage our viewers on Facebook. If you have any questions for us, for our speakers, please do write the comments in the, your questions in the comments, and we will hopefully get to them throughout the discussion or at the end. So to start, I would like to first ask Noelle about maybe a little bit more general question. If you could give us your opinion on the changes taking place in broadcasting, meaning the representation of women. If I am not mistaken, you joined the RTE in 1988. You later worked as a producer in charge and taking care of the programs, including elections and political party conferences. So what was the situation back then for you as a woman on the radio in this specific era? And what were the conditions for getting women to speak about politics-related issues?
Eva, I'm not so sure it's changed as much as one would like to think. It has in many obvious ways. There are a lot more female presenters than there used to be then. There's more consciousness, more awareness. But I think what I would have encountered, I suppose, is a kind of an unspoken bias, a kind of, you know, men's voices being viewed as more authoritative than women's. And I'm not so sure that that has changed, because in terms of contributors, which is what Women on Air focuses on getting more female contributions on air, those figures are stubbornly low still. And that's where we kind of see our role. So I didn't lack for opportunity as a producer and a presenter in many ways. And I think that is typical of a lot of women's experience in Ireland, but it's those unspoken things. I did find at one stage I was being paid less than a colleague who was doing exactly the same work. And so with broadcasting, it's very hard to know, whether opportunities are not given to you because you're female or vice versa, or simply because someone else is better. But we do have a concern around voice, and particularly the female contribution, because as long as women remain the minority on air, and that applies to presentation, but perhaps specifically to contributors, as long as women's voices are a minority, well, then their voices will always remain other. They won't be mainstream, and they'll be considered less significant. And you only have to look at the words we use for women's voices, like, which are generally, or often rather, pejorative, like shrill or high-pitched or hysterical even, whereas men's voices are often described as, authoritative, deep, and having a presence. So the only way to correct that really is to have 50-50 representation. I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but actually in Ireland, and these figures will be borne out throughout the world, though there is very little data, it's less than 1/3 of female voices on air. And that means as long as that continues, female voices will continue to be a minority.
Thanks a lot. Do you think that this is the general reality, or does it apply mainly specifically to the topics of politics and so on?
Well, what's interesting about that is the harder the topic becomes, the less you hear female voices. And again, there's research in the United States that would bear that out. That simply, when you go to politics, when you go to economics, when you go to medicine and medical matters, you tend to hear less women. So women, where they do appear, tend to still be in softer areas, fashion, entertainment, all those things, again, which lessens their authority. That is changing, but you'd be surprised how slowly it's changing.
Thank you very much. Wojciech, if I could follow with you, as you created a platform, I'm talking about Voxpot, of course, where you strongly focus on foreign-related topics, often conflict-related, very specific issues. What is the situation in Czech media in terms of getting experts and relevant respondents to those topics? Who are these people? And how is it difficult maybe to find female experts on these issues in Czech society?
Thank you for the question. First, I would start with, it was not only me who started Voxpot, it was me and Aneta. So we are like one and one in charge of this project. Yes, right now we are struggling with this question. For example, in a project we are working on right now, it's a debate about foreign policy. And about where the Czech Republic should go on the map of the world. And it's true that it's from both sides somehow, that we try to include women as much as possible. The best would be to do it 50-50, but sometimes we just meet the problem of under-representation of women in all spheres, not just media, because for example, when we would like to have somebody to comment on foreign policy, from the diplomatic circles, there are also in last 30 years of the Czech Republic, it's also quite difficult to find somebody who was there as a women, because it's also diplomacy, for example, it's nearly male only, or it was in the last 30 years, and it's difficult to find those people who can speak from both male and female perspective. So for media, it's quite difficult to work in this environment, because even if we and especially if we work often from conflict areas, from Middle East, from East and Central Europe, that it can be quite difficult to really find an expert, because everybody keeps proposing you like male experts. It's like also quite difficult to make somebody propose you like, okay, this is like interesting like woman who can talk about the topic. Like, so I would like to encourage like everyone to propose, also to think a bit harder sometimes when you like propose like speakers to media, and to think like whether maybe as Nolly said, that like sometimes it can be better like not to have the deepest voice, but to really think about the expertise, and that like there can be interesting perspective from like women's side. And yeah, like in general, it's quite a like difficult struggle, and we meet always also like this like lesser willingness to talk, like because you can see the criticism towards women when they like when they say their opinion in media. Like the criticism is much harder, like if it is not like perfect and proper towards women and than men. So I think like it's a problem, like quite a serious problem to be solved here right now.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. You know, they say that the real equality will come when we allow the same amount of women to fail as we allow men, right? So I really hope that the issue of not finding women in the areas of expertise you are trying to reach will change in the future. So I would like to follow with Timea to stay a little while longer in the Czech environment, though. Based on your research or studies conducted, or maybe just the overall feeling, where do you think we stand as Czech society in terms of gender equality topics and gender-related issues? Do we have an opinion on them? Is it any important to us?
Well, thank you for this question. And also, it seems that my internet connection is still unstable, but hopefully I will stay with you. But for example, from the surveys of European Institute for Gender Equality, every year they publish the Gender Equality Index. Czech Republic is, for me, unsurprisingly, on the lower end, under the European average levels in terms of gender equality, which is quite alarming, even though the situation is changing. But as Noel said, it's very, very slow, and without any systemic interventions, the situation won't change in 200 years, we can say. And the problem is that we can find the marginalization of the topic of gender equality even on the top levels of political representation. For example, you might hear or see in the media today how our Czech president commented, for example, transgender persons and so on. So it's not just only about the equality between men and women, but about the whole setting of the society, how we deal with differences, how we deal with stereotypes, how we deal with structural barriers and so on. And of course, it depends greatly on your social bubble. And since I studied gender studies and I'm working for the Center of Gender and Science, I could say that my social bubble is aware of the issue. But of course, in general, we as a society, we don't have this I would say heritage of gender equality politics, because, for example, in comparison to Austria, every research organization has to have in place equal opportunity team since 90s, and we don't have any of these mandatory tools. It's still in the level of recommendations, and people are also quite biased towards the term gender. They don't see behind that, for example, the issue of work-life balance, the issue of violence, and so on. And they just think it's some ideology from West countries, which was imported to Czech Republic, even though we don't have any problems here. But for example, we have one of the highest gender pay gaps, which means also gender pension gap in European Union, etc., etc. So I would say that the numbers from surveys are quite alarming, and also the political the representation we have in politics is also quite alarming and under the average of European Union.
Thank you very much. Noel, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think that Tamia has raised a very important point, which is the whole question of some kind of mandatory action, because I absolutely agree with her. It will take hundreds of years if we go at the pace we're currently going. And really, figures have not moved very far. And in fact, there's also a lack of data, which shows in itself a lack of interest, because we've no data, we can't make progress anyway. Certainly in Ireland, there's a huge lack of data. But most data that does exist shows a real lack of movement. And certainly in Women in Air, we'd be very much in favour here for mandatory quotas. That once, you know, and I understand my friend there, I'm a journalist myself, the kind of problems you encounter in terms of actually getting the requisite people. But the experience in broadcasting here is if you're required to have a certain mandatory amount of any number of people, any grouping of people, well, then broadcasters will respond. For example, during elections here, I'm not sure what it's like for you guys, but during elections here, up to the period leading into it, there's certain, you know, party political representation is required as a matter of law, and broadcasters manage to do that. So if you even had a 60-40 requirement in terms of female broadcasters or female contributors, well, then broadcasting organizations would respond to that. And certainly in terms of elections again here, there was mandatory quotas for, you know, representation for our general elections. And that had a massive increase as a result in the number of women that were elected to our Houses of Parliament. And we reckon that that's the only way the broadcasting picture will change. And it's hugely important. I'm sure you've come across that, to me, that sense that it informs public policy. It's not just a matter of equality, it's a matter of hearing women's voices in terms of the policy and the politics that are made. And in fact, during the whole COVID process, the Gates Foundation did a study in which they examined women's contribution to the COVID conversation. And they found that in America, in the UK, it ran about 19%, which is just appallingly low. That the COVID debate was framed more in terms of war, a battle that we could win or not. And we also had that turned out, well, actually COVID won rather than the men, you know. So the reality is certainly this country, whilst we had a lot of female doctors and that speaking on the topic, women's issues, I suppose issues that relate more to women in real terms were not addressed. So things like childcare to this day have not been properly addressed in terms of the whole COVID problem. So women have ended up withdrawing from work as a result. You know, wine shops, which is maybe not a real problem, were considered essential, but actually shoe shops weren't. But, you know, children's shoes, children change their shoe sizes very quickly. So closing shoe shops for 9 months had a real impact, particularly on women. So women's voices aren't heard on the broadcast media. It has all kinds of political and social ramifications. So that's where we think that, as you suggested, some kind of mandatory policies are necessary.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. Thanks a lot. I think that quotas can be a very emotional topic to discuss. But yes, we know that affirmative action or positive action really is effective in practice, right? In helping to compensate for disadvantages for various groups. If I can just ask Wojciech maybe his opinion on that. I don't want to force you to give us your opinion on quotas as such, but maybe if some kind of gender balance approach to maybe recruitment of your editorial staff you could imagine as reasonable?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's like the problem is in the country like the Czech Republic that like sometimes I feel here like in like it's kind of medieval country because like if you see like politicians like 7 men commenting from like the maternity hospital about like how women should give birth and things like that, it's quite normal. And then like if you see such a political consensus with no major party like promoting equality, then you feel as a journalist as like always as an activist if you want somehow to make it in your point of view like more normal, because and like as a journalist you don't really want to be seen as like activist all the time, like because then people can question the work somehow. Like there is always like some activism in journalism but still like I would love to see like more quotas in this in the like public sphere because just it makes me like less I don't have to fight for the topic then, like just for something I feel should be normal, because like if we have like more or less 50% of men and women, like then we should have also the like opinions from both sides, because like I believe that without that like we know just half about the world. And like in case of like the editorial policy, like or the newsroom policy, hiring half like men and women, like I think it would be like first I would love to see it in politics, because it should be the first step, like always, like as I said, otherwise you feel that you are like quite activist in a place where like politics should go first. But like for example right now we are in search of like a new editor, and we were just discussing whether it's like how we feel about that we write, because like right now we have more male than female like editors to write that we are searching just for a position of like female editor. And it but like in the end it was like yeah, it's fine, because like we are like medium, so we should represent like both. Like I'm not sure if it should be like 50-50, but like definitely I would like to see at least in our newsroom to have it like at least like 40-60 or something like that, because like it's like sometimes technically it can be difficult to do like things exactly 50-50, but at least like some there should be some representation. And I think like there is no reason why not to do it this way, like when you want to have like a good medium which represents like the world as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, it really becomes political issue. I mean, I'm talking from the side of AMO, and we've been called a leftist organization a couple of times since we started to promote the gender equality in discussions and in diplomacy and so on. Just to leave the quotas for a little bit, I would like to ask Timea, maybe what are your ideas? What else could work to help to get, in this case, more women to speak publicly? Things that come to my mind that might be causing these inequalities, maybe still unequal distribution of care between men and women, or maybe less self-confidence in women. What else can we change to make it easier for women to actually take part in public discussions?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this question, Eva. I think that I also wanted to mention how kind of badly fascinating, or fascinating in a bad way, is that activist work, or not even activist, but work towards bigger equality is framed as leftist, which is not bad, but as an insult, especially in a Czech environment and so on. But back to your question. So if I understand it correctly, you ask me what are the tools besides quotas, how to tackle the gender inequalities. And I think that first of all, we need to understand that gender inequality or inequalities in general are very complex. So there is no easy solution, of course. And when we speak about change, we need to also identify not only the structural barriers, but also the symbolic levels or cultural barriers, which we also somehow um, produce on the individual level. And this complex of structural barriers and obstacles and individual ones create the whole symbolic order, which needs to be somehow defined and tackled and addressed. And for example, on the individual level, we as people in general, we work with unconscious bias, which already Noel mentioned. And this unconscious bias is not only focused on gender, but also we have like racial bias, age bias, and so on. And we all have this unconscious bias, but what's important is to be aware of that and somehow to consciously work with that. And for example, to step up into a public debate, it would mean that we as women, but it can also be some other underrepresented group, we need to be prepared that we will be like facing different kind of obstacles or insults and so on. And we will be judged not only but by our talent or knowledge, but also by our look, by our appearance, how we are performing correctly, as Judith Butler, for example, says, if we are performing our roles correctly according to certain norm, if we fit into certain heteronormative spectrum also. And so raising awareness or should be one of the tools which needs to be or which can be implemented into the institutions, like gender sensitive trainings, for example, how to work with unconscious bias, how to how we are socialized based on our ascribed gender, and so on. So there are basically soft measures on the individual level, and also certain like strong measures fighting with structural barriers, like the norms of evaluation, the conditions of work-life balance, and so on. And it should be one complete package of actions. And we have quite good practice from abroad, but as Noel said, it's not even changing in countries which are much more further than Czech Republic. So fingers crossed for us.
Go ahead, Noel.
Yes, I was going to add to that we have a concern even around the whole use, and I don't know if Tamir would agree with me, but the whole use of the word diversity as applied to women, you know, because essentially women aren't diverse. By definition, they're more than 50% of the population. And the problem is that women then can suffer from double unconscious biases. Like we have a population here that are, I suppose, equivalent to Romani, but they're a traditional Irish population who suffer from being, so we have racism tied in with, misogyny or anti-feminist kind of policies. So the trouble, if you continue to regard women as diverse, our view would be that there's a risk in that, because then you can have policies, that apply to, women and, immigrant populations and, transgender people, that they're lumped in as being that, but they are women and those things, and so of course we're absolutely in favor of policies that reflect diversity, but it's to say that women everywhere are not, are half the population and are normative, are fit into that category in the way that men do. And I think there's a danger in kind of just regarding them as other. I think that's our concern. And then you asked Eva about, what else can be done. We have, as you guys are talking about there, a database recently developed that's, quite a sophisticated database that answers that old canard that, oh, you can't get women, there's no women available, there's no experts available. So we're answering that. And we're also training women intensely. We're taking women on weekend training groups in an effort to give them the tools and the confidence, because they classically say women, look at something and see why they can't do it, whereas men automatically assume they can do it. So there is a confidence issue there as well, potentially, which we are trying to address. So in one sense, you're trying to meet it both ways. You're trying to, on the one hand, give women the tools, the confidence, the access that they need. On the other hand, you're trying to make broadcasters and those who are constructing our media world, and of course social media now is so important in that context as well, make them aware that there are women there. And maybe sometimes we need to change the questions. Maybe, the questions on broadcast media don't need to be as political as they are. Maybe there are other questions. Maybe, what is an expert? A lot of people might consider somebody in the diplomatic sphere or a politician as an expert. Well, maybe a woman who's, minded children for 20 years is also an expert. Or, maybe we could broaden our concept of what constitutes expertise, and that then enables more women to be part of the broader conversation. But certainly we need practical tools as well as the kind of, educational movement that you spoke about, Mia.
Thanks a lot, Noelle. Yeah, I think, Timea, go ahead.
If I may react to Noelle, thank you for your remarks. Definitely, when I was speaking about the diversity, I was trying to somehow raise the issue of intersectional approach to stress out that. Of course, women are not the others because it's half of the population, but it's not a homogeneous group as well, and we should see the differences in lives or of these groups under the same label. And as you mentioned, the problem of confidence and self-esteem I think it's one of the very important issues everywhere, not only in journalism, but everywhere. I've read a research somewhere when they find out that women tend to apply for the job position only if they fulfill 90 to 100% of requirements, but men tend to apply if they fulfill only around 60%. So, and it's not something we are born with this feeling, but I'm very opposed to essentialistic view, but we are socialized into lower esteem to be good girls, and certain traditionally framed masculine traits we are somehow punished, and we are called bitchy, for example, or bossy or whatever. And so, as you mentioned, the supportive or affirmation actions like coaching, mentoring, soft skills trainings for women are definitely helping, and it might be one of the tools which can in future change our self-perception also.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Wojciech, also for raising your hand. I wanted to give you floor anyway, so go ahead.
Thank you. Because I can't see here the raise your hand button, because maybe I have some strange version.
I see your real hand. It's okay.
Yeah, good. I will do it this way. I had just one remark. When we did discuss what should be done in other way, and I think that at least in the Czech Republic, it would be definitely labeled as like communism worse than the one before 1989. But for example, if we see, and it's not just in in the issue of like women's rights, but in many others, if we just see how we study history in schools, for example, like it's usually like decades and centuries of history of men, like battles of one king against another. It's like, for me, it's kind of silly, like why we focus exactly on this, but like for like last centuries, there wasn't any space for women, and then it's difficult probably to explain people like, okay, after like centuries and millenniums of like men's history, why now in this moment of history we should start caring about women. Like I think it's also the part of the problem as we approach like history, and that until now it was men's history. And exactly as you debated before, like because like we see like some things as like those like glorious battles with heroes for I don't know what sometimes as something to remember and like to mention, and other aspects of life like in history maybe mostly more connected with women are not there, like it's just empty space somehow. So I think like it's also part of it, how we approach like what was here before.
All right, once you have the word, Wojciech, I wanted to ask you, because Noel and Tima mentioned that there is some certain picture or stereotype of women, what kind of things they must fulfill, what they fear when stepping out into public space. Do you feel like you had to fit some sort of frame, some picture, some stereotype when you were becoming journalist?
As a man?
Yes.
More difficult to to realize that it's happening, because like usually if you are the privileged one, like you don't think that much about, like you just feel like, okay, you have to like work, you don't see this like disadvantages somehow. And I don't know, like I don't really think about it. I know like how I felt once when I went to a public debate dressed like it was a debate about activism, and I came like it was like 4 men. I did not really realize that I'm like one of 4 men in this debate, and I came dressed as a woman for that, just to like show that, okay, there is a one voice missing. And I remember exactly how I felt like that like it was like by this somehow I put myself in the position when it does not matter what I say. I'm just like the one there like sitting for like for nothing. They did not even like give me much space to talk. And then I felt, how is it to be like underprivileged, but from the other side, I don't really know, like if you mean like in terms of like being like always right and like more expert than I actually am. Like maybe there is such pressure, but I haven't think that much about it. I will start. I will try it.
Okay, thank you. I would like to go back just for a little while to the trainings, because we in AMO this year we started workshops for university female students on public speaking, strengthening their confidence and training them to be better in their presentation. So Noel, as you mentioned, part of your agenda is also training women who wants to become more skilled in journalism and in their performance. So what do you focus on mainly in these trainings?
Well, there's, I suppose, conceptually, Eva, one of the key things, and I'm sure my journalist colleague would agree with me here, one of the key things that a broadcaster needs, or a print media indeed, is a story, you know, and the amount of people who think that the media is there just to give over whatever message they wish to transmit is very large, and that includes women. So one of our key messages to women is you need a story, you need a hook, you need something that somebody's going to want to broadcast that's either entertaining or compassionate or moving. And that's one thing we focus on with women. What's your story? What are you telling us here? So that you're not just saying, say, for example, you were to come on and tell me about, you know, your work in your institution. Well, really, you know, most broadcasters won't be terribly interested. What they might be interested in is how you got into it, how you got involved, or whether there's an individual story you can tell about how this discussion changed something, or so there needs to be a story. And I think that's the key of journalism. So that's one of the key elements we transmit. And then we run over a weekend, we do a radio interview with each individual, recorded. We then discuss those afterwards. We do a television interview with cameras, a proper interview, so that people have the experience, you know, of actually going through the process, so it's not as intimidating. And then we have a mentoring process for 6 months where journalists and producers have agreed to support each individual for a period of 6 months to help them get on air, to run through, we do practice interviews with them before they go on air, so that they're supported in the process. And in fact, a number of them have formed their own little WhatsApp groups whereby, you know, I want to go on air, but I don't really want to go promote myself. So one of the other persons in the group contacts the broadcast organization on my behalf, and vice versa. So it's a network of support. So we've had, you know, a few really good successes, you know, of women that are broadcasting that never broadcast before. And they may be, I suppose, 50, 60, but we've trained hundreds. So lots of them it doesn't quite work, you know, because it's a big leap, you know. And one of the things we need to tell them, or they need to understand as well, is the variety of media, particularly nowadays. You know, most people, and it may be the same in Czech Republic, is most people think of the national broadcaster, which I worked with, and they don't think of the smaller outlets. They don't think of, you know, there's ways of getting on air that aren't necessarily, you know, just national media. So it's that training is very helpful, but it's costly, and it's, you know, and it's intensive. But we're, you know, like every organization, yeah, we're looking for more funds, and we're, you know, so that we can train more. We also run workshops, which are, you know, bigger groups of women. For example, we did one recently for one of the universities. We did one for a homeless charity. We did, you know, for a range of these organizations, for the National Women's Council, who we work closely with, so that a range of women can be enabled to get their voices across. Because of course, and that again must be true for you guys, is society as a whole is poorer if women's voices aren't heard, if, you know, if their perspectives aren't heard. And it's not to say, I mean, some women's perspectives will be very similar to male perspectives, and some male perspectives and vice versa. But it is true that they have unique and particular experiences that aren't currently being reflected on the media.
Definitely, thank you. Before moving on, I would like to just remind our viewers on Facebook that they can write their questions into comments, and we will hopefully get to them later on. So to move on, I would like to further touch upon the content side of things. I would be the last person to say that there is a difference of doing things in a female and a male way. Yet I can imagine that in some specific situation in the field, as you, Wojciech, are often exposed to, I can imagine, is there such a thing as a female or male approach to shooting a story? Is there any specific type of work a woman or a man don't or do in the field?
Like, I don't really think that there is some big difference between like the technical side, because like I know really good journalists on like in front of camera and behind camera who are like men and women, does not really matter. But like about like the biggest difference is probably like in stories and in like how you can use different like situation, you know, in which you appear. There are like definitely like people who are okay with using that they are like male or female to take the most from the situation. For example, like I have a good friend of mine, or like a friend of mine from France. She's part of collective like Journal Opus. I don't know how to read it in French, but it's a collective of I think 7 or 8 like female journalists, and they go to like conflict areas to the North Africa. Like she, like the friend of mine, she worked a lot in Ukraine in the war zone, and she wrote like awesome stories about women in the war zone, and like from the perspective of women, like taking in account that like in war, like there is definitely like different position of men and women. And she was able to write stories which I can't, because I don't have the the possibility to speak on such sensitive issues, like with such an understanding, probably with like women which are like especially affected by the like warfare in their areas. So and like I believe that, like, I don't say that it's like 100% same, like thinking or being like male or female, but I think that that's exactly why it should be like much more 50-50 in the newsroom, because then you can like report on the topics which are closer to you, and it's not just about like being male or female, it's also about being like left or right, or like having different viewpoint on the affairs. But definitely like especially in this like conflict areas, like the difference is big, and because of that, like it's also like great that we have like both men and women to report on the situation. But from the technical point of view, like I don't really think that there is like any difference. Like maybe somebody can tell you that for women it can be difficult to carry like TV camera, but I don't think so. And I know like many camera women who can do it like perfectly. It's more about priorities and what you focus on.
Thanks a lot. As we already went into differentiating, I would have a playful question for Timea. I would say a playful question. And that is perhaps if you could give us your idea about the culture of rubrics titled as women or as men. Why do we have them? What are they? Who writes them?
Well, I don't know exactly who writes them, but certainly when I personally see it, my eyes kind of bleed because I think that these rubrics or these columns framed as male or female are based on particularly on those already mentioned gender biases, because we somehow even explicitly or implicitly assume that certain topics will be interesting for just certain group based on their gender. So if you go deeper into the content, it's no surprise that in the female columns you find recipes next to the diets, like fashion, cosmetics, childcare, whatever. And it's not bad to have these columns because it might have its audience. It's just bad to assume that every single woman is interested in those topics, and it's also, I think, quite harming to suppose that every man is white heterosexual guy interested in motorbikes and so on. And for example, I am interested in motorbikes, and when I try to read the Czech columns about motorbikes, in every single one, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'm quite sad about that. But in almost every column, you can find certain kind of sexism, like for example, mentioning that this bike will carry your better half, and and depicting your girlfriend as a jewelry of the bike and so on. And no one is counting with women as the actual riders and so on. So I think that work like functioning on these binarities, which are somehow the opposites, it's not helping. And the situation in Czech Republic is again quite sad, but not surprising. As for example, I forgot the name of the guy, but he's, I think, the editor-in-chief of the website of Czech Radio, and he said that he is surprised that they have a great proportion of female readers, even though, I'm stressing that, even though they don't have any special column for women. So it's surprising for the editor-in-chief that women are interested in politics and in foreign affairs and so on, which is quite surprising for me that he's so out of reality.
He apologized in the end, Radek Kedroń, but it was...
What he could do, right? It was
Yeah.
pathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to mention this kind of story, but yeah, he apologized. He was surprised that it had such a reaction.
Yeah, he was surprised that we were surprised, right?
Right.
I would say, you know, that the one thing the experience in Ireland would show is that whilst on one level some things haven't changed, on another level things changed very quickly, and I'm sure they could in the Czech Republic as well, because this country was essentially a theocracy run by the Catholic Church until 20 to 30 years ago. And I've seen it in my lifetime. In other words, as a child, this country was absolutely run by the church. And that has completely overturned. And at least what you would get here is you couldn't get the kind of comment that you're talking about. Someone would end up having to resign with a comment like that here. So whilst the practice is still quite poor and is lagging behind, nonetheless, you know, it's the public discourse now, at least, is absolutely in favor of gender equality, and it's just not permitted for people to make, you know, any kind of sexist remarks or to make disparaging comments or the kind of, you know, demarcations you're talking about, Tamara, there between what's, you know, assumed to be women's material or men's material. That has become very blurred. There are increasingly a lot more women in politics, and then that is getting reflected, you know. And I think, as you absolutely said, and a really important point is that some of that sexism does a great disservice to men, you know, because there's lots of men now who just love to cook, who love spending time with their children. You know, there's a lot of men who have a much more full life as a result of feminism. And to kind of try to pigeonhole men in the way that you pigeonholed women is actually does a disservice to both sexes, you know. But I do think things can change quite fast. You know, you guys have a very unique history, and you know, it is true that things can change and that the perspectives of people, and the first thing is in the discourse. If people aren't allowed, or it is really not permitted by society for people to be sexist, well then practice will follow, even though it's slow and very slow.
I couldn't agree more. So I have a question from the audience. It's for Wojciech. It's from Sarah, and she's asking, thanks to all speakers, I would like to ask whether you, Wojciech, whether you see differences in female, sorry, now I lost it. Female representation when it comes to different regions in foreign policy. You mentioned it already, that there are some differences. Sarah's asking, as you work in Eastern Europe or in the Middle East, is there regional particularities? So if you can mention maybe something from your own work.
Yeah. Like what strikes me most probably was that like in the parts of the world where I expected that such problems wouldn't be that like the blatant, like for example, we were making a story about like climate protest in Germany, and I was thinking like we wouldn't have such a problem in Germany in terms of like climate, because like where else, like if not even like in climate is some balance, where else we can like demand it. But and there was like the same problem you can meet nearly like everywhere, that they had some kind of like climate commission, 7 members, and like to represent also like women, there was like one in the commission, and it's always like, okay, but we would like to have it like somehow balanced, so like it would be nice to have also like a woman in this. They say, yeah, like definitely there is one, but it's the problem when you have one that she was just ill at the time, and like that's the practicalities of journalism, that if you do it just for like having one, like to say, yeah, there is women, like quite often like she's not available at the moment, because like in journalism, like if you work like this, like it's quite tough like to get someone to speak, and when you have just like one woman, like usually you have none in the end. But then like definitely in the countries where I work quite often, like in Russia, for example, like the problem is just really big, or in the Middle East, that like it's nearly impossible to get women to speak because like they are not in the functions, they are not on the positions, so like it's just impossible for journalists to find somebody who is not there. And like for example, to find somebody, and as I said, like it's always difficult, like sometimes you have like 4 people who you ask before you get the person. So if you have like much less representation of women, it's like 4 times more difficult even. And it's like if you find after like 4 approaches 1 man, then it takes you like 10 or 12 like emails or phone calls to get a woman, and it's like nearly impossible because you have just limited time. So like for this like, and we sometimes somebody tells us like, yeah, but you don't have women in this. And I say, yeah, but like it's like really like for being there 2 months and work on this and to have it. So it's like, as I said in the beginning, like the other side of the problem, that the underrepresentation. And then there are other, like for example in the Middle East, I believe that for me it's really difficult to get women to talk. But again, when there would be like female journalists, it's much easier because like I think it's even easier than, for example, in Russia or this like societies where it's like, okay, like equality is fine, but we just don't have it. And in those societies where it's like men and women are different, but there is somehow sometimes more respect. And when like female journalist comes and want to have somebody like from the like female point of view, I believe, and I heard it, that they are more like willing to provide like this, like, okay, we will find it to you because it's like, because you are female, she is female, it's like some media like for like females and like your work, so probably sometimes easier to come by. So yeah, but in general, like it's really difficult like everywhere, like even in like I haven't tried filming in like Norway, for example, or Sweden. Maybe it would be easier, but like I did it in the West, in the East, and like everywhere it's really difficult.
I think that's a really interesting point you're making, which actually we've never considered. And I think what you're talking about really is essentially a question of language, because in the English-speaking world, we don't really have that problem of finding the experts, because there are plenty of female experts in every field you can think of when you combine, you know, the United States and the UK and a small country like Ireland, but our first language is English. So in the English-speaking world, I don't think you have that same dilemma quite, because the experts are there. They are definitely still a bit harder to find, perhaps, than the men, certainly in certain specific areas, but they are there. Whereas actually, and as I say, it hasn't occurred to me before, when you're limited, when you're trying to do things in a particular language, well, then you're limited by that society, aren't you? Which may, you know, like Norway, or it may have limitations imposed on you as a result.
If I may, I think it's also about the form of journalism which you do. Because if you are like reporter on the ground, it's always that you really need to be like, you need those people who are present somehow. And if you are in small community and you need somebody to talk about like some problem of this like community of like 200 people, like usually there will be the mayor, the vice mayor, and the like third person male. So like you don't have this like 1 billion of like English speaking people. but you have just a few people. I remember when I wrote something from like protests in Leeds in Britain, that it was also like that. It was quite like the disbalance was there, and you don't have like unlimited amount of people. And but I don't have that much experiences from like Britain and the US from reporting. But like being the person on the ground when you have just this like limited amount of people, it's always like very difficult.
Yes, and I think you're right, because obviously, as we discussed earlier, you know, politics is still, you know, massively male, and politics tends to go on air. But there may be ways, you know, there may be people that are, maybe you don't need to interview the mayor. Maybe it's somebody else has, you know, a similar experience that can kind of transmit it. You know, maybe it's not always the figures of authority, but I accept your point in general. It's not easy. It's a vicious circle in one sense, isn't it?
Actually, it's like a really interesting question, because then you like struggle between representation and position. And as a journalist, you always want to have the like the most responsible person, so on the like highest position, and you both would like also to have the representation of different points of view, but still like the one who is responsible is interesting for you in journalism. And because of that, it's awesome like to have like women also like in the top positions of power, because then like you are really happy when you can find a like female president of something, or because it's like, wow, like you have like two things in one, and it does not really happen often.
Thanks a lot. As the time is up, but I would like to give a last question from the audience to Noelle. If Noelle hears me, I feel like she's frozen a little bit, but I'm not so sure. Can you hear us?
I can hear you okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's have the last question from Harini.
I can hear, yes.
Okay. Harini is asking, she's commenting. I completely agree with you about the different adjectives used for women on TV or video. Often women presenters or moderators of debates are seen as angry or unlikable when they try to make their point, while their male counterparts don't receive the same treatment. What do you think producers and broadcasters can do to flip this mindset?
That's interesting, Eva, because I think it brings us back full circle, perhaps, to quotas, because if women's voices were norm on the air, well, then we wouldn't be using these adjectives, I think. It would allow women to be, and that their voices, you know, aren't seen as different. In fact, Margaret Thatcher in Britain, her voice actually deepened the more she went into politics. And women who are successful, they've been known to deepen their voices. This is an actual recorded process, because they're finding they're more acceptable in a world. But if the whole broadcast media was 50-50, well, then that will become less and less relevant and less the case. And I think we're also back to Jamea's point about unconscious bias, that if we bring awareness to that, that we shouldn't, and women can be that too, you know, and aware that, you know, that these voices, that women are entitled to be angry, they're entitled to
Thanks, Noelle. Thank you a lot. So I would suggest let's just not be a prejudice and destroy all the stereotypes. And that is everything that will fit into today's debate. I would like to kindly thank my guests again, Noelle O'Reilly, Wojciech Bohacz, and Timea Krofony. This has been my first moderation, so here is yet another woman overcoming her fear of speaking. It has been a pleasant discussion with you on this important topic. Also, big thanks to all of you who have been watching us on Facebook, sending our greetings from my colleagues from the Brussels binder as well. And I am very much looking forward to meet you again, hopefully in person someday, Noelle. And that's it from us. So thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.